Today is the second panel of the Web 3.0 Tech Talk, and the topic today will be focusing on application adoption. So is Web 3.0 technology finally contributing to the new world? So today with us, we have a really good panel, and some of them have been here for the last panel. So we have Dietrich, the ecosystem lead for IPFS, and we have Qi, who is Zhou, who is founder of QuarkChain and Web3Q. And we have Yilun Zhang, the CTO of NKN. And we have a new guest, Larry Pang, who is the head of BD and the ecosystem for IoTeX. So today's panel, we will be organized in such a few segments. First, each of the panelists will have a short intro about themselves, as well as their company and also their products. And then secondly, we'll go through a general question section. So we'll go through a few questions that we collected from the community and from the Twitter space and Telegram. And the last section, we'll have a more live interaction with the audience. And we pick up questions from the chat, and maybe we'll open the mic as well. Let's see if we have time. So that's kind of the format. And let's get jump started. So how about we start with Larry, because you're the new one to the panel. Please, Larry, please go ahead.
Hey, everyone. My name is Larry, head of business development here at IoTeX. My background was in consulting. Did a lot of consulting projects at Oliver Wyman in digital transformation for 5 years before joining crypto in 2017. IoTeX at a high level, what we are, we're a layer 1 blockchain platform that's focused on connecting real world devices and real world data to all types of decentralized applications. We built a layer 1 blockchain that's EVM compatible from scratch, and lately have been really focused on a set of IoT oriented layer 2 protocols for trusted devices and trusted data. We have a big upcoming release of our layer 2 data oracle. It's called WebStream, and it's a way to ingest data from different types of devices to generate proofs that could be submitted to the blockchain for things like proving you've been active or drove a certain route to work or generated certain amount of electricity with a solar panel. So, this topic today of Web3 technology contributing to the real world is very relevant for us as an infrastructure provider to different types of applications that want to incentivize people to do things in the real world with digital reputation and digital incentives. So excited to be here. Thanks so much for NKN for the invites, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Larry. Then we can go to Dietrich from IPFS, please.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me back again. Excited to have an interesting conversation with you all. My name is Dietrich Ayala. I work at Protocol Labs on the IPFS ecosystem. Additionally, in the areas of libp2p, the network agnostic peer-to-peer toolkit for building applications, and Filecoin, which is a storage network for decentralized storage of data at very large scale. Previously, before joining Protocol Labs about 3.5 years ago, I spent over a decade working on Mozilla Firefox and related projects in that open source ecosystem. So I come from a very Web 2 and web platform background and bring a lot of those practices and what we learned, both open source, open platform development, into the Web3 and crypto space.
Thank you, Dietrich, and welcome back. And next, please, Qi, please.
Hi, my name is Qi. This is also my second time to be here. It's very pleasure to meet a lot of old friends and new friends. So I have been working in the area of Web3 infrastructure, especially using sharding technology to address both the computation, that's TPS, and also space, that is the storage problems. Currently, I'm working on a project in Web3Q, and it's going to rebrand to the name to Ether Storage, which aims to scale a lot of issues we found in the Ethereum default storage, which can, for example, grab dramatically decrease the price and the cost, and also increase the capacity to like terabytes or even more. Right now, we are closely working with Ethereum Foundation on some issues like in terms of data availability, which in Ethereum roadmap aims to upload a large amount of data onto blockchain using kind of like data availability sampling, reasonable code technologies. I'm also working on proof of storage on dynamic data sets so that we are able to prove those data that is uploaded from data availability and store somewhere else in the network. I'm also co-authoring EIP 4804, which is standard defines Web3, is a Web3 versions of HTTP, which aims to render a smart contract web objects. Once the smart contract, for example, is able to host a large amount of the binary large objects as enabled by future Ethereum data availability and our storage solution. So very happy to be here to communicate, discuss the future of Web3. Thank you.
Thank you, Ji, and welcome back as well. So our last panelist, also from NKN, is Yilun, please.
Hello, my name is Yilun. I'm the co-founder and CTO of NKN. So nice to talk to you again. Basically, NKN is the decentralized network layer for Web3. On the one hand, we incentivize and enable users to share their network resources and create a decentralized network. And on the other hand, we provide Web3 applications or just normal Web2 applications, a decentralized network layer that enables them to do real-time decentralized communication, just like how we what we do in Web2, the internet. And also we build our own decentralized applications like a mobile for decentralized messenger or NKonnect for decentralized end-to-end accessibility and connectivity and tunneling service. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And we probably can talk more about what we're doing later.
Okay, thank you, Yilun. And so now we have the overall introduction of the panels. I'm Bruce, also part of NKN, one of the co-founders of NKN. So let's start with the general questions. So one of the questions that has been asked is, do you have any examples of Web 3.0 kind of application or technology really succeeded in mass implementation or helping real productivity? So, or can you talk about it? What can be coming close to it? So I don't know, anyone want to take this question?
I can kick things off if that's okay with everyone. Yeah, when we think about real world utility in Web3, I think there's a lot of great examples just over the past couple of years, right? Starting with DeFi Summer in 2020, it was really an interesting time where people were starting to trust protocols and deposit large amount of assets into these smart contracts. Kind of starting with a proof of stake and the DeFi yield farms and stuff, really gave people a lot of trust that these protocols can run efficiently and transparently. And I think 2021 was all about GameFi, people doing things in the digital world to earn digital assets and digital reputation. And finally, now we're kind of in this real world era where people are starting to do things in the real world to earn digital assets and digital reputation. I think there's a lot of great examples as like STEPN and Helium that have proven a lot of things about building up a large supply side, right? Helium has made a lot of headwinds by putting more than 500,000 devices out there with these very attractive early adopter incentives to, incentivize people to purchase physical devices, install them, and contribute resources to this kind of public utility connectivity network, right? And now they're at the stage of connecting the supply side to the organic demand side, right? When we think about kind of this like bootstrapping tokenomics versus the long-term sustainable organic supply-demand match, you don't have to look any further than Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin has this built-in where there's a large period of time where injected incentives in the form of block rewards are given. In the very long run, there's not going to be any block rewards, so it's going to be organic, user transactions are going to feed the mining rewards, and there's not going to be any quote unquote injected incentives, right? So that also applies a lot to the way yield farms work. It's just that 50-year halving time on a Bitcoin was scrunched into a couple weeks, right? So as we start to learn more about how Web3 can really bootstrap real world networks using these early adopter incentives, I think the next challenge is, how do we evolve from very fervorous supply building and hype building activities and converting that into this organic demand for the thing that the supply is feeding, right? So that's kind of how I think about where we're at today. But a lot of great examples of supply building DApps out there that are now very much underway in filling demand side. And that's really where the real world adoption is coming from, this non-incentivized demand for these Web3 networks.
Thanks, Larry. Anybody else want to also talk about this?
Sure. After you.
Yeah, sorry, please go ahead.
So this is Dietrich, and one of the things that, Larry covered a bunch of areas that are, pull on the use cases of IPFS. We work, with a lot of DeFi use cases and various data platforms. And it's interesting, this, kind of like the traversal and direction of how data moves across these systems means IPFS is involved in a lot of them. One of the, I think, differences around the typical, what you would think of when you think of Web3 technologies and IPFS, is that it does start to shine in critical situations, not when, things are operating optimally, but when maybe sometimes infrastructure isn't. And we've seen, this kind of show up a lot in the NFT explosion over the last year or so, with, as NFT usage grows, that people need to ensure that their assets and metadata are pinned to IPFS in order to ensure if a platform goes down, that the data is still there. That's one example of resilience, but I think it doesn't probably speak to where the question was being asked from. So it made me think about mass adoption or critical use cases where Web3 approaches start providing value. And some of the things that we've seen is in these tumultuous times, seeing the storage of critical data on decentralized and distributed networks happening more and more often. There's a project that used Filecoin and IPFS to be able to store lots of archival data around the elections that happened in the United States, and specifically around the January 6th attack on the Capitol in the US, in order to combat misinformation, to be able to make sure that there were records of these events. We've also seen that with the war in Ukraine right now, where groups on the ground are archiving digital archives from Ukraine in these places to be able to ensure the safety and continuity of access to critical information. This focus on making sure that the tools for distributed storage and archiving and availability of critical data is definitely a focus of what we're doing with IPFS and Filecoin. And then one of the things that makes it so that storage of these use cases are available to the broadest set of people is actually putting it on a P2P network. And we see this also in, the Digital Ministry of Taiwan has recently launched their website on IPFS and are experimenting with IPFS as a way of making sure that their critical services are not subject to DDoS attacks and can be more resistant and available to the people that need that information most. So I think, when we think about growth in Web3, oftentimes we think about the best case, but one of the things that Web3 also brings is a resilience, sometimes in the worst and most critical cases as well.
Thanks, Dietrich. So I think, Yilun, you want to say something as well.
Yeah, I want to say something from a different angle. So instead of talking about new or I would say new trends like NFT or DeFi, our approach of adoption is more like taking the existing field that Web2 is like working and it has been tested by market and by users. We know that there are people needing stuff there, and we try to build a Web3 version that works better or like provides something that Web2 cannot. So one of the example is, or a few example that we take is, we try to build, let's say, a decentralized messenger called mMobile. So it's from the user's perspective, it's just really like another messenger, right? It looks similar, so it provides what the users need as for like communication tool, but it's a purely decentralized. There's no like centralized server at all for this. Yeah, of course, currently it cannot. We cannot say like it has been it has being massively adopted yet, but yeah, it's at least we know that there are people require that needs this kind of tools. So it has a potential if we can like grow it in the right way. It has a potential to gain like millions of users, and I would say that's pretty. Can be defined as a mass adoption for crypto, right? And also for another example is NConnect. NConnect is a like end-to-end communication tool for that enables you to access like remote machines or NAS device or whatever device that can be that is running like operating system. So we use NConnect ourselves to control our remote servers behind the firewall, or like access our like home computers when we are not home. And also there are like already like tens of thousands of users on different NAS devices, NAS vendors using it. So it has been proven that it's quite useful and users like it. So I think we are definitely on the right track to gain like a better or like a bigger adoption. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I also have a few words. So I think everyone gave a lot of great examples on how right now that the technology can solve problem. Actually, from my perspective, the whole internet is just a combination of resources from computation, storage, and bandwidth, which I think everybody now is covering part of it. Especially like, for example, IPFS is doing really well on archiving the static data, and a lot of projects is built on top of that. On the same time, we also observe a lot of hot data storage demand. For example, when the user want to interact with the Web3, they want to store their for example, tweets, their comments, their articles, or even they can put their emails on top of Web3 infrastructure. And I think in these directions, there's still a lot of things that are missing. And one solution that we are going to address, one problem we are going to address is able to prove this a lot larger amount of storage that are dynamically created by a lot of users. And the users can change, can delete, can even like can create new data, and it can easily interact with other users, so that we can easily enable future, for example, decentralized social network or decentralized email, all kinds of some applications that are already very popular in the Web 2, but at the same time, due to some limitation of infrastructure, we're still working on them, but still we believe that there's a lot of applications once the infrastructure is ready.
Okay. So I think that's a really good coverage of different applications, I think, today, and also where we are going in the future. So one of the questions I also, from my side, as how do you define when we will say kind of Web3 applications become successful? Because in the Web 2.0 space, right, if you a startup, you go to a VC, you will say, okay, look, I'm already have 1 million daily active users, and I grow this one from 0 to 1 million daily active user within the last, let's say, 2 years or 5 years. So do you think that's also kind of a good metrics to measure how successful is Web 3.0 apps? Because I personally don't think any Web 3 apps have 1 million DAU. Maybe DeFi can be counted as as a 1 million DAU Web3 app. But other than that, like Mirror, which is the kind of decentralized publishing platform, there's some gaming sites, and there's some like a social networking site, or StepN, which is kind of the play to earn kind of site. But do you think that's metrics we should look at it to define it, or should we look at different metrics to look at the Web3 adoption?
Yeah, I think when we think about Web3 adoption, right? Like I don't know, at the peak of StepN's kind of hype cycle, I know they posted something like $150 million in protocol profit in Q2, but I think daily active users or the peak daily active users is a hard one, because it's not tricky to give a ton of tokens away for very simple activities, and everyone is going to fall into that honeypot, right? It's more about maybe the monthly active users, or even the annual active users, right? It's more consistent usage of these applications is the metric to track, right? I think we think a lot about like the change in behavior on the user side for Web3 to become quote unquote mass adopted. But talking with a lot of big companies lately, all of which are looking into Web3 but don't really know how to get started. A lot of the biggest question we hear from these companies is, why do we need blockchain to do this, right? And I think it's still pegged to the mindset of, how do we take our existing business operations and integrate Web3 into it, right? And I think NFTs is kind of like a side quest for a lot of these companies is very attractive, because they don't have to disrupt their current business model to incorporate NFTs into their community strategies or their marketing strategies, right? But once you start to think about adjusting your business model to be more Web3 oriented, that behavioral change is something that, changing behavior for users is probably one of the hardest things to do, right? And we're probably seeing some of these ride sharing apps and like Uber and Lyft. Like, imagine 10 years ago, it's like a lot of people thought it would be impossible to change the behavior of people being comfortable riding in a stranger's car. But also on the company side, right? The behavioral change of thinking about branching out outside of just your traditional business models into something brand new. That behavioral change is, I think, something that a lot of companies are waiting for the larger brands to really make the first move and give the green lights, right? One example I can give is, back in my consulting days, I was working for a lot of financial market utilities that were making the shift from on-prem data centers to the cloud. And the only time that they were finally comfortable with making large investments for their digital transformation strategies to move to the cloud is when FINRA, the Financial Regulatory Authority, a government entity, put their data on the cloud. And if the regulator or the people that are going to be measuring compliance, they start to utilize new technologies, then that really provides a big green light, right? So all of these big partnerships like Polygon and Starbucks and Reddit and all these other large companies incorporating NFTs is amazing green light for every other company in the world to start deploying their NFT strategies that they've been cooking up. But once you start to think about converting the main business models into more Web3 oriented business models, I think people are still waiting for a green light. And that's not just a single killer use case, but it's a whole process to shift the behavior and shift the mindset of companies to adjust to this new mode of thinking, I would say.
Okay. So there's another kind of related question, and because Larry touched upon that, we want the kind of mainstream companies to join this space, like the Starbucks and the Polygon. I think that's really exciting because everybody drink coffee. I mean, almost everybody drink coffee. So this is really kind of help with adoption. But do you see there's any kind of anybody see kind of resistance from the old like Web 2.0 because they might consider it a threat? So we already see there's a few kind of choking points, like the DNS or the domain name service, the cloud service platform, the app stores, and the web hosting. They can all become a choking point that if they feel like the Web3 app alternative to their own app might become a threat. They could do things to censor or block or deplatform. Do you see that happening, or do you think that we have enough legal protection and the consumer demand to mitigate those kind of risks?
I can speak to that a little bit. The work that I do on my team at Protocol Labs, this is Dietrich, the team is called Browsers and Platforms. And one of the areas that we work in is engaging in standards processes for the web platform itself. And typically, I think, Web3 as a whole routes around changing the web. We have HTTP and DNS onboarding pathways to get to distributed and truly decentralized services. But one of those choke points, as you mentioned, is some of the existing Web 2 infrastructure. Most browsers today don't natively implement any of these technologies. We talked in the previous question a little bit about, monthly active users, daily active users. We work a lot with Brave Browser, which has almost 60 million monthly active users and almost 20 million daily active users. And so one way that we think about, from a metric standpoint, that growth is about total addressable market. So are our technologies, how many people is our technologies actually in the hands of? And that's one metric we use. But back to your, that was really the last question. To this question, there is some institutional friction. So one of the recent standards that have been approved by the W3C is the Decentralized Identity Core specification. And, there were, I think 70 to 80 companies who are paying member companies of the W3C who voted for that specification to be approved as a recommendation by the W3C. However, 3 specific companies formally objected to that. And that was Apple, Google, and Mozilla. And so these were 3 companies that objected for various reasons to that specification being made a recommendation. And ultimately it was appealed and was approved as a recommendation by the W3C. But if you dig into these conversations, there's a lot of skepticism around some of these specific technologies. A lot of the Web 2 security model is designed around user safety. And as we've seen in Web 3, there's still a lot of sharp and pointy edges when it comes to end users. And, some of the approaches of these projects are, with great power comes great responsibility. But what we've learned in building the Web 2 web is that users do need a lot of protections in place in order for these technologies to be for them to reasonably balance the risks and trade-offs that they're making. What we need is for users to be able to understand those risks and make good decisions around when to engage with them. But that's pretty difficult today. So I think that that's one aspect of where all of us open web pages in our browser every day. And all of us in Web3 often do that in a Web 2 way to get into our Web3 technologies, which means we're not actually having the true decentralization at the edge. And partially it's because some of the frictions around the decision-making fora for how the web is actually made. And that's one thing we're working on slowly and patiently in IPFS and at Protocol Labs.
Okay, I think that's encouraging to see. And there's another thing, I actually also relate to Web 2 to Web 3 transition. So if you look at the current social networks or publishing platforms, they almost always have kind of recommendation engine. So they can figure out what you like, and then they kind of push you to the, or feed you the information you need. There's lots of debate of the good and bad about that, but I think at least some people find it useful and convenient. So in the Web 3.0 world, and how do you think we can do an alternative way to do that? Because, for example, the mirror.xyz, it's like a similar to Medium, but decentralized. I find it's extremely difficult to find content. Other than I know that, let's say, Larry is the publisher, so then I follow Larry.eth, and then I can find his publications. But otherwise, I really don't know. Do you think there will be a way to really kind of have a decentralized kind of recommendation engine or something that is both useful to the user, but also can preserve the kind of the privacy of the user? Anyone want to take this one?
Yeah, I can talk a bit about it. So yeah, I think Yeah, it's necessary or it's a must to have something similar, or for like two reasons. The one is from the user's experience. Well, a recommendation engine or something is kind of a must because everyone has basically a fixed amount of time or like attention, and they cannot tolerate like spending more time or effort trying to find like the same content when they migrate from Web 2 to Web 3, right? So from users' perspective, this is a must. And also from like legal or like other perspective, it is also needed to have some sort of filter when necessary. It doesn't happen a lot, but without such like functions, some applications cannot even get onto, let's say, the App Store or something. That which is definitely a nightmare for like any applications for nowadays. So as for how do we implement it, I think it's still like a kind of open question, like how to do it in a both in a decentralized and efficient and effective way, right? I think probably we might have to do it in like a different way. Like we probably have to do it on the client side instead of server side, or maybe a hybrid architecture. Part of this something that is done on the server side and something done is client side, and we kind of combine it together. But I think for now it's hard to do it as good as Web 2 without help of any server. So just as Dietrich mentioned, we probably have to start with a hybrid model that we might need some help from the server, and then we can do something else on the server on the client side and combine them together to get a better like user experience. And after all, that's the key to user adoption if we want to grow like to millions of DAU, just as you mentioned.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on this recommendation system. So yeah, I think like the recommendation is really essential, which I can personally feel is very helpful for myself when I want to browse the information. We can just recommend related information, which save my time and effort to, for example, to search for more information that I would like to take a look. And then in the decentralized recommendation, I think one good thing is that a lot of things are data are transparent. For example, right now, a lot of projects, they try to basically build a kind of a reputation system or kind of using southbound token to associate corresponding the reputation credits to accounts, and which are transparent to everybody. And at the same time, which can be used by everybody to feed into the recommendation system to train the model to tell once we want to deliver the information to one user based on his historical activities, then what may be the user's preference, and everybody can use the data. One thing I think Yilun mentioned about is regarding the efficiency, especially right now, the decentralized world, the computation and also the storage are really, really expensive. In terms of a computation perspective, I think one direction, actually, I'm also closely following, is using kind of a ZK technologies, which we are able to, for example, just like imagine like we can write a corresponding recommendation logic on top of the blockchain using a smart contract, and so we define this logic. But at the same time, the computation actually happen behind off-chain. You can use server, you can use client, depending on what is most convenient for the users. But the user can verify those results, and together with the corresponding proof that tells that, hey, this is actually the result of the recommendation engine. Basically, everybody knows how it works, how it use data, and what is this output, and what the example news that it will forward to me. And so I think this is something that we feel like a lot of advances in solving the computation problem. On the other side, there are a lot of we believe a lot of additional basically hot data that we need to store in the Web3 and also use them as the input to these computations. And that's something that we also want to solve using the our proof of storage technologies, so that we can get a large amount of the user data. That it can be maybe several kilobytes or even tens or hundreds of kilobytes or megabytes, and then put it together and feed into the, for example, like ZK protocols, and then we can publish the corresponding logic on the smart contracts, and everybody can verify their recommendation results. This is something that I feel like really exciting, that can solve a lot of computation and also storage problem in the future Web3.
Yeah, I think that's actually very exciting. I think we might be able to create a new big project as well, because I think the Chi, you mentioned ZK, but also in my previous life, I work on this federated machine learning. So basically, so the client side, you have all the data and you do the computation with the model on the client side, but then the metadata or some of the kind of the parameters from the model can be fed into an even larger model that can be centralized or distributed computing in the cloud. So the cloud or the centralized part does not really know any data, but the only thing you know is the two kind of neural engine exchange kind of the parameters, which does not have any personal identifying information. So together with the zero knowledge proof, I think that will be actually, we might be able to build kind of a distributed recommendation engine. Maybe the kind of the holy grail. Yeah, please.
I did have a thought. One of the things that we learned around the mass adoption of the web as a platform was that the reduced developer surface area ended up being one of the accelerators and amplifiers of adoption. So right now in Web3, you have to, as a developer, target each one of these L1s or L2s or smart contract platforms all separately. But when we talk about recommendations, to some extent what you're talking about, the Web 2 corollary are things like RSS, which are very simple static formats that are easily interoperable between systems. You don't need to make a single platform commitment to be able to use something like RSS for syndication. And that's one of the things that I really think is important for Web3 to grow into in order for adoption to increase, is a deep focus on what interoperability looks like, specifically to reduce the surface area that developers have to target. As long as it is a large, complicated, very, very broad field of things that developers have to target to do very simple things like content syndication, for example, it's an uphill battle for them, and you won't be able to get mass adoption. So I think like efforts like the CASA, which is the Chain Agnostic Standards Alliance, these are really important groups for achieving that interoperability between systems that really reduces the barriers to adoption by developers.
Thanks, Dietrich. Yeah, I think that's actually a good segue to one of my next question about the kind of the major challenges you face as the pioneering Web 3.0 developer and founders. So, and also I noticed that Larry, you probably have to leave in 5 minutes. Do you want to take this, or do you want to say a few final words about your area of competence and IoTeX and what kind of exciting things are coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. Really appreciate the invite. Sorry I had to jump a little early, but just my perspectives on like what's coming up next for Web3, right? Like I think from like the user adoption perspective, if you're interested in finance or decentralized governance or collectibles or art, there's already been a lot of opportunities for people to enter Web3 through DeFi, through DAOs, through NFTs, etc., through GameFi, right? But I think there's a huge wave of folks that maybe don't trade stocks on their day-to-day basis, don't collect stamps, don't do things that are kind of proxies for a lot of the things that are going on in Web3 now, but do carry all sorts of devices and interact with all sorts of kind of systems and machines in the real world. And I think that's going to be a really big gateway for the next million plus users to come into Web3, right? I think STEPN, Helium, Demo, Pollen, all these new kind of token incentivized physical infrastructure networks are really going to unlock a lot of the new kind of masses into the Web3, right? And that's really what IoTeX is focused on, right? Like we are like all the other folks on this call today, we're infrastructure providers, right? I think the Dietrich's comment about development is super important to not only get new users on board, but bring new types of developers to adopt this kind of mindset of decentralization and transparency. So from IoTex's perspective, one of the big releases that we have coming up is called WebStream. It's basically this device oracle that's going to let people translate what a device says into something that a smart contract can understand. And if you ask me, it's kind of like an interesting if this then that generator. So if you can prove something you've done in the real world with some device data, whether it's your phone's GPS location or your wearables healthcare metrics or your car's electronic control units or your farm's solar panels, all of these things are, devices we can see as users of a blockchain, not only to, contribute data to networks, but also in the future deliver services based on instructions from a smart contract, right? So I think Web3 has evolved so much in the past few years, but the introduction of machines and devices as proof generators and autonomous agents that interact with blockchains that can be seen as more like orchestration mechanisms. I think this is something that is extremely top of mind for IoTeX and a lot of the other kind of real world and hardware-focused projects out there. So stay tuned for that launch in early October. We're really excited, and there's a lot of amazing partnerships with NKN, QuarkChain, IPFS, Filecoin, etc. We're all providing very important pillars of infrastructure that that DApps need to unlock this new wave of Web3. So with that, really appreciate the invite to join today, and looking forward to the next couple sessions. Thank you so much, Bruce and NKN team.
Thank you, Larry. And definitely we'll get you back for the next panels. Okay, now for the rest of the panelists, back to the kind of original question: what kind of main challenges you have faced while building up this new world? And also, maybe we can also kind of start to wrap up a bit and talk a little bit about what you are excited about that you are going to bring to the kind of adoption side. Please.
Yeah, maybe I can start. From my perspective, I know there are a lot of challenges, but I will probably start with the challenges that I faced most recently. So one of the challenges that we met is the differentiation. So as you may have known that we provide some of the service, or like when we talk about, let's say, Web3, we often talk about a decentralized version of blah blah blah, right? Like decentralized networking, decentralized storage, decentralized messenger. That's what we are trying to build. Or decentralized, let's say, a decentralized VPN or whatever. So when we talk about the decentralized version of blah blah blah, we compare it with existing like product with Web2, right? But very often we will find it hard to differentiate from the Web2 version of it enough, because of course we can have a list of advantages that the Web3 version of blah 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 can do, but it's often not enough for users to make their mind to switch, because the Web2 version of something is already like working. It might not work perfectly or like even well enough, but at least it's working and user has already like used to it or like using it. So we have to find enough reasons or like differentiation to persuade users to switch to the Web3 version. Ideally, that's something that the Web2 version cannot do, or at least it's something that Web3 version can do and can do much better than the Web2 version. That's something that we find in general a challenge trying to adopt. Trying to find a field that Web2 is already doing, right? Of course, there are like fields that Web3 can do that Web2 cannot really do, and that's much easier for users to see why we should use a Web3 version. And that's my thought.
I have a couple of thoughts. So from my perspective, I think there's two major challenges when starting a project or run a startup in Web3. The first is how to find and work with the best talents in this Web3 world. So there are a lot of ideas come up every day from the Web3, all kinds of DeFi, CKP, data availability, all kinds of new ideas, and how we are able to make sure we are able to find the best talent, that we are able to, for example, exchange our ideas, problems, solutions, and latest progress and solutions, all these things with these people, and how we are able to find more, and so that we are able to come up with the best joint output for all these problems and solutions. So that's one direction we are right now closely working with Ethereum Foundation. So we received a research grant in terms of data availability, and we're closely working with them to find what's the latest problem in terms of their solutions, what are something open questions, and how we are able to help them solve these problems. We will also probably submit another research proposal to Filecoin IPFS regarding our research on proof of storage on large dynamic datasets, which we believe that will be helpful for both, for example, Ethereum ecosystem, also Filecoin ecosystems. So this is something that we believe that once we have more and more best talents that are working together to solve all the industry challenge problems in the Web3, then I think the Web3 will become closer, and to become much easier to be massively adopted by more people. And this is one challenge. Second challenge is how we are able to educate the common users about what's the latest technologies, how they are able to shift the paradigm, for example, from the user behaviors or mindset or all kinds of things from Web 2 world to the Web 3 world. So right now we are also closely working with a couple of community members. One example is like I'm attending, so I'm very happy to attend today's to the space, and we've discussed all the latest ideas, and also meet a lot of new friends here to explore what the future Web3 is. I think this is also very important to let a lot of people, especially in the bearish market. We found it's really good way to find a good with the signal to noise ratio. So there are a lot of good builders that still keep working in this space, and so we are able to basically much easier to collect and receive all this feedback with stronger signal to noise ratio, and also be helped to broadcast all the we believe all the best informations happening in this Web3 to more people. So this is some two challenges that I think are most important to us, and we are still keep solving these problems. And if you are interested to how to solve and how to work together, happy to reach out to me, and we will explore how we are able to work together to solve this. Thank you.
Dietrich, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, I mean, about challenges, where to begin? So many.
Too many.
But yeah, but we're not all here because it's easy. We're here because these are important issues facing the world that we think that these technologies can have some impact on, and so it's why we sign up to do more challenging work. I think one of the challenges we talked about a little bit earlier was the institutional challenge around technology adoption by decision makers at the standards level. Sometimes we participate in these conversations, and between people who are tackling important challenges and making design decisions around web platform architectures that really do affect billions of people. And when they look at some of our technologies, it seems a little crazy, right? So that is a challenge that we deal with a lot. One of the other challenges from a developer adoption standpoint that we encounter a lot is actually that the Web3 developers are pioneers. They are trying to figure out how to make things work that maybe have never worked before. What that means is they're actually pretty clever at bolting things together and getting something to just basically work, but maybe not so good at describing how it could work better. And so, we'll get developers who can, get a basic dApp working that does something kind of interesting. But we're like, when we ask, how would that protocol be easier to work with? What would the developer tools look like? They're so busy hacking and kind of like used to their Web 2 tools from debugging to profiling to performance to network analysis, that it's hard to translate that into a more cohesive platform set of protocols and approach. So sometimes like pulling teeth to even get your most excited developers to really sit down and think and introspect around what would the ideal look like or feel like for a given workflow. And I think like the last challenge that came to mind, especially listening to some of the other people talk, is actually like, how do we communicate the value? I think Yilun was talking a little bit about this, like, communicating the value of the new features that you get in technology with Web3. When I worked at Mozilla, we had that challenge around privacy. We were like, okay, as a privacy-centered browser, how do we articulate the value of that? But the network effects of these non-private, highly surveilled systems and browsers are so strong that it's difficult to get people to cross that chasm and make that adoption decision to not use the defaults that came along with their system. And I think for us, one of the challenges that we have is really in there is a design one. Like, we don't have a design language for communicating to end users whether or not a given application or website or service they're using gives them more agency or control as a user. We also don't have the design language to communicate the level of risk relative to the amount of benefit that they get off. So as somebody who needs to access a service, but in the context of a critical need, their risk and benefit trade-off is going to be a little bit different than your regular user who's just looking to buy some shoes or browsing NFTs. So we need to develop better language from a design and communication standpoint around these things that Web3 brings that the regular web doesn't really talk about at all. There's been some work in kind of like visually representing how surveilled you are. Things like ad blockers do a pretty good job of that, but that's not really the same as user control, of portability, of being able to freely move between systems without friction. None of those things are really articulated in a user experience or visual language so far very well. So that, I think, is going to be a major challenge for the space.
Okay, thanks, Dietrich. I think we might have time for one or two audience questions. So I saw Vlad Lanu has requested to speak, so I'll let you, if you want to join, please speak up if you have a question or any comment. Okay, if not, I actually have a last question for everyone, maybe a fun one. So when do you think, like a survey, so when do you think your grandma or your elderly relative or grandpa that age that will be able to use the a true Web3 app? Will that be next year or be 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road? What's your estimate?
Oh, I can start. I say that's a really hard question to answer. So let's think about Web 2. So if you ask me when is the time that I start using Web 2, like application or like internet application, I probably don't have an answer because I didn't even realize it, right? So I think Web 3, instead of being something directly interacted to or related to user, it is also infrastructure, or probably more importantly, it's a fundamental infrastructure. And let's say PayPal, right? PayPal is a existing popular application. By integrating Bitcoin as a payment method or like a currency support, should we call it a Web3 application? Probably not, right? But it kind of integrate with some part of the Web3 infrastructure, which I will call Bitcoin as the basic infrastructure, right? And then it helps, like then PayPal can support it and use it. So I would say from the infrastructure's perspective, it is really hard to say when we really use it. I think the ideal case is that when we use it without even realizing it. I think hopefully my grandma can start using some applications which actually use some of let's say, NKN service as a communication or networking tool, but it never let the user know. It's just transparent, and then that would be the ideal case, right? So I would say, as back to your question, maybe that's, I would say, 5 years or so. That's my guess. But ideally, we would like the users to use Web3 without even realizing it, and I think that's a real deal maker for like infrastructure.
If we define, so I have few thoughts. Like if we define to be a Web3 user that has at least a user-owned address, for example, created by MetaMask or some wallet, not only just like a exchange addresses, because like exchanges addresses does not belong to the user. Then I feel that will take, as Yilun said, maybe 5 or 10 years, or maybe even long, because a lot of some grandparents, they don't even have email, so they are not even Web2 users. So if I predict like a lot of Web2 users that is able to enter into Web3, that may take some additional time once they actually own address on top of blockchain. But on the other side, we found there's a trend of smart wallets, which has some very smart design that may allow a lot of Web2 users can immediately own smart wallet addresses, and at the same time, they are able to easily switch from custodian mode to self-custodian mode, which means that they can potentially still using the addresses that are created by smart wallet from, for example, custodian like centralized Web2 to self-custodian using, for example, the external account created by wallets. So for that trend, suppose it's, for example, EIP 4337, that is the major EIP for that direction. Suppose it's widely adopted in maybe 2 or 3 years, then I think it's maybe able to accelerate those adoptions of Web3 in the future. So maybe there are a lot of surprising things that is happening. So we will see.
Okay, so if there's no Dietrich, do you want to take that, or shall we wrap it up?
No, I think that's a great place to end on. I think, like a lot of us are working on technologies that actually can be in people's hands today, and I do think, like, I agree, that a couple of big UX wins might result in a world where people don't think about it nearly as much, the same way that they don't think about how they use Web2. But all of us are here working towards bringing those dates in. I really do think that it'll be a lot less than 10 years for a lot of these things, and I think that might just end up, people won't know they have a wallet address, so they don't know that they have a database record in a backend somewhere either. But crossing fingers, we see that sooner rather than later.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dietrich, IPFS, Yilun from NKN, Chi from the QuarkChain and the Web3Q, and also Larry from IoTeX, all the panelists. And thank you, everybody. Stay with us and listening in. And we will have 1 or 2 more panels in the future. We haven't decided the topic and the time yet, but it will be as exciting as the previous 2. So stay tuned. So thank you again. And this is a wrap. And hope to see you again next time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.